We're beginning the Albet Pike section of The Phoenix. What's the longer? Let's see. The Phoenix, an illustrated review of occultism and philosophy by Manly P. Hall. Here's our Albet Pike, Mr. Spooky. Albet Pike, the Plato of Freemasonry. In this article, it is not our purpose to write of Albet Pike, the Arkansas gentleman, nor Albet Pike, the shrewd jurist, nor again of Albet Pike, the American poet, nor shall we enlarge upon his military career, which elevated him to the rank of brigadier general, nor the high merit of his literary style and the numerous honors bestowed upon him by Freemasons and Freemasonry in all parts of the civilized world. Men who knew him intimately and sat under the spell of his personality and words are better fitted to enlarge upon his many virtues. We shall only speak of his rare abilities as far as is necessary to establish the main subject of our discussion. The memory of great men lives after them, but their wisdom is interred with their bones. We worship at the shrine of the illusions. We worship at the shrine of the illustrious, but seldom emulate the qualities for which they came to be so elevated. We recognize the merit of achievement, yet ourselves make small effort to attain it. There is a forgotten Albet Pike. Pike, the Platonic philosopher, the Hermeticists, the alchemist, and the Kabbalist, and the transcendentalist. It is to rescue this genius from the oblivion of forgetfulness that we have framed this essay. Albet Pike was the great American Freemason. He found the organization in a log cabin and left it in a palace. He took all the numerous vicissitudes upon himself and labored unceasingly through a long and industrious life for the perfection of Masonic ideals. For 32 years he was the sovereign grand commander of the Supreme Council of the 33rd degree for the southern jurisdiction of the United States, with such dignity that at his death William Oscar Rome asked, "Who will dare aspire to fill his chair now vacant?" At the time of his passing, to this Masonic Prometheus was paid the following magnificent tribute. Albet Pike was a king among men by the divine right of merit, a giant in body, in brain, in heart, and in soul, so majestic in appearance that whenever he moved on highway or byway the wide world over, every passerby turned to gaze upon him and admire him. 6 feet 2 inches, with the proportion of a Hercules and the grace of an Apollo. Man, Manly P. Hall is just really sucking his dick. A face and head massive and leonine, recalling in every feature some sculptor's dream of a Grecian god. While his long wavy hair flowing down over his shoulders added a striking picturesque effect, he was in himself the highest, grandest embodiment of the virtues and graces of Freemasonry, a living exemplification of the exalted and exalting principles of your great world-embracing brotherhood. We ran the whole gamut of early earthly honors. He climbed fame's glittering ladder to loftiest height and stepped from its topmost round into the skies. Henry R. Evans, Inspector General Honorary of the Supreme Council of the 33rd degree, thus describes this grand old man of masonry. I often saw him on the streets of Washington, his snow-white hair falling about his shoulders like the mane of a lion, his broad, expansive forehead, his serene countenance, and his powerful frame awoke thoughts in me of some being of a far-off time. The conventional dress of an American citizen did not seem suited to such a splendid personality. The costume of an ancient Greek would have been more in keeping with such a face and figure. Such a habit as Plato wore when he discussed upon divine philosophy to his students among the groves of the Academy at Athens, beneath the brilliant sun of Greece. Who knows but what Albert Pike was a reincarnation of Plato walking these 19th century streets of ours? Fred W. Alsop, in his book Albert Pike, a biography, says of Pike that he was visited and consulted by important persons from all over the world. When not otherwise engaged, he sat and dreamed and delved in an ancient lore. And as was his wont, smoking his long Meerschaum pipe and watching his pet birds, in the Centauri Souvenir of his birth, published in 1909, are contained a number of tributes to Albert Pike from men high in Masonic circles. James D. Richardson, Sovereign Grand Commander, calls Albert Pike Freemasonry's greatest son, adding that he stands without a rival in the hearts of all Masons of the ancient and accepted Scottish rite. Throughout the world, the Sovereign Grand Commander also pays a direct tribute to Pike's scholastic achievements. He had been a fine Greek and Latin scholar, had taught himself many languages and a great number of dialects, among them the Sanskrit, Hebrew, Old Samaritan, Chaldean, Persian, and American Indian. From these he went on to a study of the Parsi and Hindu beliefs and traditions of the Rig Veda and Zend Avesta. He left 15 manuscript volumes of translations and commentaries of these Aryan writings. George F. Moore, 33rd degree Grand Prior, made this beautiful statement. It was Pike, the Mason, who by the divine alchemy of the love of his fellow men transmuted all his mental possessions into the pure gold of wisdom, poesy, patriotism, and law, and embodied them in our Scottish Rite rituals as they were revised and spiritualized by him. Many endearing titles have been bestowed upon Pike by those who knew and loved him. He was called Albert Magnus, the Great Albert, the Homer of America, the Master Builder, the real Master of the Veils, the Oracle of Freemasonry, and the Zoroaster of modern Asia. This is the man who is identical in his purposes and ideals with the highest aspects of Freemasonic thought. The man who taught himself Sanskrit after he was 70 years of age, and those whose unpublished manuscripts in the library of the Supreme Council represent, together with his published writings, the most important known collection of research work into craft symbolism. In time, these manuscripts will be published for the good of the craft and the world. In every sense of the word, Albert Pike was a self-made man. As a mere youth, he desired education above all things. Too poor to pay his matriculation fee at Harvard, young Pike set himself the task of self-education. How well he succeeded in this labor of love was well attested when, in later life, Harvard bestowed upon him the honorary degree of Master of Arts in 1859. Pike declined the honor with thanks, saying that when he was penniless and needed an education, the doors of the institution had been closed to him, and that he cared nothing for the deferred degree. Excuse me. This is a piece of General Pike's letter convoking the 33rd degree written the year before his death. The House of the Temple of Supreme Council of the 33rd degree for the Southern Jurisdiction of the USA, 433rd Street, Northwest Orient of Washington District of Columbia, the 25th day of September, 1890, of the Supreme Council of the 90th year, the Grand Commander unto the Inspector General of the Supreme Council, very dear brethren, by this urgent letter of convocation I invoke you, laying aside all other business, to assemble here in council for the good of the order in accordance with our statute on the 20th day of October next. I have looked forward to the coming of that day with impatience and longing since the present year began, for I would fain to see you all once more. It is not possible, I know, that you can all be here. There have been vacant seats at every meeting for 30 years, yet all of us who may be present will miss those whom we shall have in vain hoped to see, and the pleasure of our meeting will be sadly marred thereby, especially for those of us who are now declined into the vale of years, for the absence of a dear friend whom we can hardly hope to see again affects us like his death. How can it not distress us and deject us to know that there is but little likelihood that we shall ever have opportunity to see the dear faces and hear the loved voices again? How can it not sadden us to remember that one of our brethren who became an active member in June 1879 died in May 1889? Without ever having met with us, his business as a lawyer alone preventing, and that 3 only of us have ever seen him, he is to all the rest but like the shadow of a name in a land of dreams. Surely, of a little group like ours, bound together by ties, ought to be strong as fate, having joint responsibilities, held by solemn vows to the performance of joint duties, each owing to the other counsel and advice, each knowing how too many vacant chairs impart its authority, lessen its power for good, and detract from its respectability. Every brother should be willing to make even great sacrifices to see his brethren once or twice, at least in his lifetime. Dear brethren, let not this urgency of remonstrance against being absent, when to be present is possible, to be offensive to you. Undoubtedly, we can do the work that is to be done without the help of those absent, could not be a matter of indifference and unconcern to us, unless our love for them were mere idle liking, and our desire to see them a mere fleeting wish. Always the silver cord of brotherhood is weakened by the long separation. Socios ergo convocus omnes. May our Father who is in heaven have you always in his holy keeping. I guess that was written by Albet Pike himself. Whew. Careful with this old book. From the foregoing, it is evident that Freemasonry not only accepts Albet Pike as a standard of Masonic excellence, but by the dignities showered upon him gives official recognition to the systems of thought which he inculcated upon the rituals and symbols of the craft. To Albet Pike, Freemasonry was synonymous with scholarship. Having searched as few men have searched into the hazy background of Freemasonic tradition, Pike is undoubtedly the best qualified authority to whom one can turn in the effort to discover the essential elements of Freemasonry. Let us then consult this splendid oracle, gathering from his own words the essentials of Freemasonic philosophy. It is neither necessary nor especially desirable that all men should hold similar beliefs concerning the nature of God or substances and purposes of the world, nor is it in harmony with the sovereign good that any should viciously revel or denounce the beliefs of their fellow men. The occult and metaphysical sciences are the oldest known to this race, and Freemasons of the higher degrees who, ignoring the importance of transcendental branches of learning, viciously criticize those who have discovered the importance of these sciences, not only reveal their utter ignorance of the text of their own textbook, Morals and Dogma, but also of that fundamental Masonic tenet which gives to each man the guarantee of unpersecuted freedom of thought. In his interpretation of Masonic symbolism, Albert Pike naturally turned, as all scholars must ultimately do, to those ancient institutions of learning from which has descended into which to those ancient institutions of learning from which has descended to this age the whole bounty of rational good, nor does Pike hesitate, through any false pride, to acknowledge the origin of his illumination. In the mysteries of Ceres and Proserpine at Eleusis, of Isis and Osiris in Egypt, of Attius and Adonias in Syria, of the Druses of Lebanon and the Druids of Britain, of the persecuted Gnostics and the reviled Kabbalists, as well as a score of others, he found the roots of the greater tree which was grown up through the ages under the name of Freemasonry and spread its branches over the modern world. He who denies this denies Pike the rituals and the evidence for the wealth of Freemasonry lies in those traditions with which it is bound to the great cultural system of antiquity. Members of the craft proudly refer to their brother Pythagoras as an illustrious example of ancient initiation. But do they remember that this brother was a transcendental magician, possessed of all the supernatural powers which moderns ridicule, and immortalized because of the superlative qualities of his erudition? Pike senses a deeper dignity, a fuller meaning, and a higher purpose. He was a man apart, one of a small race of rational giants, to whom it is given to see beyond the narrow sphere of personal interest into that broader vista of high purpose and unselfish end. When we say that Albert Pike was a Kabbalist, we say no more than he himself maintains. In Morals and Dogma, it is to be found the following statement: one is filled with admiration on penetrating into the sanctuary of the Kabbalah, at seeing a doctrine so logical, so simple, and at the same time so absolute. The necessary union of ideals and signals, the consecration of the most fundamental realities by the primitive characters, the trinity of words, letters, and numbers, a philosophy simple as the alphabet, profound and infinite as the word, theorems more complete and luminous than those of Pythagoras, a theology summoned up by counting on one's fingers, an infinite which can be held in the hollow of an infant's hand, 10 ciphers and 22 letters, a triangle, a square, and a circle. These are the elements of the Kabbalah. These are the elementary principles of the written word, reflection of that spoken word that created the world. If more evidence be necessary, consider the 235 pages of the manuscript commentary on the Kabbalah and Pike's autograph now in the library of the Supreme Council. Nor should we forget that in his Masonic writing, Pike drew considerably from books on transcendental magic by Eliphas Levi, a Kabbalist and a magician, whose concepts Pike must have highly admired since he quoted them so frequently. There are hundreds of references to Kabbalism in the Magnus Opus and the Legenda of the Degrees from the 4th to the 32nd, Any Freemason studying these carefully could not but become acquainted with the leading tenets of Kabbalistic tradition, as these are derived from the Sefer Yetzirah and the Sefer HaZorah. As a Hermeticist, Pike is an equally distinguished exponent of primitive revelation. In his lecture on the Night of the Sun, or Prince Adept, Pike reveals his intimate knowledge of the Arcanum. The Hermetic art is, therefore, at the same time a religion, a philosophy, and a natural science. As a religion, it is that of the ancient magi and the initiates of all ages. As a philosophy, we may find its principles in the school of Alexandria and the theories of Pythagoras. As a science, we must inquire for its processes of Paracelsus, Nicholas Flamel, and Raymond Lully. Pike then hazards all by a magnificent occult statement. None of that race of philosophical metaphysicians whom materialists despise so heartily ever soared more gloriously into the Hermetic heavens. The science is a real one only for those who admit and understand the philosophy and the religion, and its process will succeed only for the adept who has attained the sovereignty of will, and so become the king of his elementary world. For the grand agent of the operation of the sun is that force described by the symbol of Hermes of the Emerald Tablet. It is the universal magical power, the spiritual, fiery, motive power. It is the odd according to Hebrews, and the astral light according to others. Therein is the secret fire, living and philosophical, of which all the Hermetic philosophers speak with the most mysterious reserve, the universal seed, the secret whereof they kept, and which they represented only under the figure of the caduceus of Hermes. This is the grand Hermetic Arcanum. What the adepts call dead matter are bodies as found in nature. Living matters are substances assimilated by living matters are substances assimilated and magnetized by the science and will of the operator. Pike binds Hermeticism to Freemasonry and thus demonstrates the line of its descent. The Hermetic science of the early Christian ages, cultivated also by Geber Alphrabius and others of the Arabs, studied by the chiefs of the Templars, and embodied in certain symbols of the higher degrees of Freemasonry, may be accurately defined as the Kabbalah in active realization, or the magic of works. Pike's high admiration for Plato, as well as his cultivation of the orderly rational procedure of the Platonic philosophers, entitled him to be regarded as a legitimate exponent of Platonism. In Morals and Dogma, Pike distinguishes Plato as the greatest human of revelators, and in another place declares that Plato drew his doctrines from the East and from the mysteries. In his lecture on the Grand Elect, Perfect and Sublime Mason, the Grand Commander summarizes the philosophical aspects of the craft in the following words. It is philosophical because it teaches the great truths concerning the nature and existence of one supreme deity, and the existence and immortality of the soul. It revives the academy of Plato and the wise teachings of Socrates. It reiterates the maxims of Pythagoras, Confucius, and Zoroaster, and eventually enforces the sublime lessons of him who died upon the cross. Won't say his name, funny. Pike's summary of the path which men must walk for the achievement of immortality, or the greatest good, is essentially Platonic, and the same which was obscurely depicted in the ceremonials of the ancient mysteries, especially in the death and resurrection of the martyred Son of God. Oh, I added a word. Especially in the death and resurrection of the martyred Sun God. He declares that the noblest purpose of life and the brightest duty of a man are to strive incessantly and vigorously to win the mastery in everything of that which in him is spiritual and divine over that which is material and sensual. This is the inevitable moral conclusion which Pike arrived at after analyzing the confused anthropomorphism of ancient peoples. In accepting Plato as supreme among the revelers of truth, Pike aligned himself on the side of metaphysical philosophy as opposed to natural philosophy of the Aristotelians. We have yet to speak of Albert Pike the alchemist, or rather we shall let him speak for himself. The Hermetic gold is not only a true dogma, a light without shadow, a truth without alloy or falsehood. It is also a material gold, real, pure, the most precious that can be found in the mines of the earth. Whatever is matter contains salt, and all salt, nitre, may be converted into pure gold by the combined action of sulfur and mercury, which sometimes act so rapidly that the transmutation may be effected in an instant, in an hour without fatigue to the operator and almost without expense. At other times, and according to the more refractory temper of the atmospheric media, the operation requires several days, several months, and sometimes several years. By the foregoing, we believe it has been amply demonstrated that to be the enlightened vision of Albert Pike, Freemasonry was a repository and perpetuator of the most precious and essential doctrines of mankind. His impetus to Freemasonry was an uplifting one, calling the brothers to their dignity and estate and rescuing from the confusion of misinterpreted symbols the principal elements of the arcane doctrines. To this grand soul, it was necessary that Freemasonry be adorned with the insignia of learning in all its various departments. His life and actions reveal that Freemasonry was Albert Pike's religion, not Freemasonry in its outer sense, but in a defined aspect in which all the rites and degrees blazed forth with the light of divine wisdom and authority. We have but to study the life of the man to discover that through the symbols, to the interpretation of which he devoted his life, Pike found his Creator and was brought face to face with the living Word, which is in the consummation to all Masonic travel. Albert Pike was great because he recognized greatness. He is immortal because he refused to accept mortality. He was a true master Mason because he refused to see in Freemasonry less than the most sacred and most profound of all moral tradition. In his legenda of the degrees of the Scottish Rite, Pike sets forth a Masonic creed, his Masonic creed. In this is epitomized the Grand Commander's philosophy of life. Believe in God's infinite benevolence, wisdom, and justice. Hope for the final triumph of good over evil, and for perfect harmony as the final result of all the concords and discords of the universe. And be charitable as God is toward the unfaith, the errors, the follies, and the faults of men, for all make one great brotherhood. This brings up a most moot question, one which has perplexed Masonic scholars in particular, in the craft in general for a goodly number of years. Is Freemasonry a religion? The superficial Mason is likely to answer in the negative. Studious investigation, however, will reveal that as the outer symbols are in the main derived from the religious symbols of ancient nations, it naturally follows that the inner traditions of the craft are concerned with the esoteric interpretation of those symbols, as an interpretation which must inevitably deal with the various aspects of sacred sciences. If we turn to our oracle once more, we find the answer in the opening sentence of the Legenda of the 19th degree, where Pike declares, Masonry has and always had a religious creed. It teaches what it deemed to be the truth in respect to the nature and attributes of God, as the loving and beneficent Father of all mankind, as a supreme and perfect intelligence, as not in any wise the gigantic and distorted image of a man reflected upon the clouds. His fullest statement upon this subject, however, is to be found in his essay on Masonic symbolism, where he writes, but those who frame its degrees adopted the most sacred and significant symbols of a very remote antiquity, used many centuries before the temple of King Solomon was built, to express to those who understood them, while concealing from the profane the most recondite and mysterious doctrines in regard to God, the universe, and man. And those who framed the degrees and adopted these symbols used them as expressions of the same sacred and holy doctrine, and interpreted them quite otherwise than they are now interpreted in our lodges. I have at least arrived at this conviction after patient study and reflection during many years. I entertain no doubt and am ready to give the reasons for my faith that the principal symbols of Freemasonry, all are really ancient, concur to teach the fundamental principles of the great and widespread religious philosophy, and hieroglyphically express certain profound ideas as to the existence, manifestations, and action of the deity, the harmony of the universe, the creative word, the divine wisdom, and the unity of the divine and human, the spiritual, intellectual, and material in man and nature that have reappeared in all religions and have been expounded by great schools of philosophy in all the ages. The ancient symbols of Freemasonry teach, I think, the profound religious truths and doctrines that in reality are Freemasonry. I am so far from being one of those who think that it teaches no religious creed or doctrine, as that I firmly believe that it consists in a religious philosophy, that it teaches, and that he only is a true Freemason who correctly interprets for himself the symbols. Here Pike commits himself in no uncertain manner to the fundamental premises of metaphysics and occultism, namely that under the outer symbols and dogma of religion there exists an esoteric key to the secrets of nature and the purpose of human existence. The point which Pike is trying to make is that Freemasonry is not a religion, but the religion. Freemasonry does not align itself with any individual institution of faith that seemingly exists for the purpose of confuting some other cult. Freemasonry serves and nurtures man's natural impulse to worship and venerate God in the universe and good in the world. It interferes with the creed of no man, for it is above creeds. calling its members from vain wrangling over jot and tittle. It invites them to unite in harmonious adoration of the universal Creator. It calls men from theory to practice, from vain speculation to the application of those great moral and ethical truths by which the perfection of human nature is wrought. In Masonic symbolism, however, Albert Pike senses something more exalted than even the ethical and moral virtues. Speaking of the ancient schools, the prototypes of modern Freemasonry, Pike notes it is certain that something in the ancient initiations was regarded as of immense value by such intellects as Herodotus, Plutarch, and Cicero. The magicians of Egypt were able to imitate several of the miracles wrought by Moses, and the science of the hierophants of the mysteries produced effects that to the uninitiated seem mysterious and supernatural. Pike even invites the studious brethren to discover anew those recondite philosophies, through the understanding of which man becomes an adept, not by name alone, but by virtue of his transcendental powers. The Freemasonry of Albert Pike is too vast and grand a thing to be grasped by those who have not spread the pinions of their inspiration and soared upward into the rational sphere. Albert Pike was a real Masonic initiate. He felt the dignity and profundity of the work. He knew the high calling to which master builders are dedicated, piercing the veil of futurity. Piercing the veil of futurity with his prophetic eyes, he dreamed with Plato and Bacon of a world ruled by wisdom and the return of the golden age. Ponder well this prophetic utterance. Let the most absolute science and the highest reason again become the appendage of the chiefs of the people. Let the sacerdotal art and the royal art reassume the double scepter of the ancient initiations, and the world will yet again emerge from chaos. By the passing of Albert Pike into those greater mysteries of which the earthly lodge is but the outer symbol, Freemasonry was deprived of one of its staunchest defenders and noblest exponents. The period of Pike's administration was the golden age of Masonic enlightenment, the renaissance of those great institutions of the ancient world rendered luminous by the exalted personalities of Orpheus, Pythagoras, and Plato. The triumvirate of enlightened learning, weary with his labor, bowed but never broken by the responsibilities of his office and the misunderstandings of an unbelieving world, this noble soul passed his dreams to the keeping of others, and drawing the folds of his robes about him, lay down to rest. Over his mortal remains, splendid even in death, was spoken the funeral service of the Kadosh, words he himself had framed and bestowed as a priceless legacy upon the craft. Death is the inexorable creditor whose indulgence nothing in the world can purchase. I gotta read that again. Death is the inexorable creditor whose indulgence nothing in the world can purchase. Every moment that sees a newborn child laughs at the light sees also a man die, and hears the cry of a breaking heart, and the lamentations of those who sit lonely and in the desolation of affliction, no longer seeing the faces of dearly loved ones. Round the little island of our being, on which we follow our various pursuits of toil or craft, of usefulness or mischief, throbs the illimitable ocean of eternity, upon which round the isle a broad circle of impenetrable darkness brooding lies. But beyond that zone, the outer ocean sparkles, and its white-crested waves dance in the light. And somewhere in the distance, the islands of the blessed are dreaming, girdled by the peaceful waters. The spirit of Albert Pike still guides Freemasonry to higher honors and fuller understanding. The impetus he gave to a clear realization of spiritual and ethical values will continue in ever-widening circles, like ripples of a water from the stone thrown into the pool. The whole world has been enriched by the masonry of this philosopher, whose words are known to be comparatively few, but whose genius has tingled the lives of the multitude. In closing this tribute to the master builder, we would like to leave with the reader the same message which he left with the brethren of the craft. Those cults and creeds may come and go upon the ebb and flow of the universal tide. The Freemasonry of Albert Pike will endure as a monument throughout the ages to the vision of a true prince of the royal secret. So religions decay into idle forms and the mummery of meaningless words. The symbols remain like the seashells washed up from the depths, motionless and dead upon the sandy beaches of the ocean, and the symbols are as voiceless and lifeless as the shells. Shall it always be so with masonry likewise, or shall its ancient symbols, inherited by it from the primitive faiths and the most ancient initiations, be rescued from the enthrallment of commonplace and trivial misinterpretations, be restored to their ancient high estate, and again become the holy oracles of philosophical and religious truth? Their revelation of divine wisdom to our thoughtful ancestors, and thus make true and real the immense superiority of Freemasonry over all modern and ephemeral associations that and thus make true and real the immense superiority of Freemasonry over all the modern and ephemeral associations that ape its forms and caricature its symbolism. We will begin the sorcery of Asia some other time. Until next time.